So, Control, right? I don't exactly enjoy this game. Don't get me wrong, it is not bad by any means. If I were to rank it a number, like all the popular YouTubers do, I would give it a 6 or even a 7 out of 10. However, there is a huge problem with this game that can be summarized in 2 words. Missed potential. So, to improve my resume, game design skills, and most importantly, to entertain us both, I decided to redesign this game. But before we start, there is one thing I must do. Control is a video game created by Remedy Games. We follow Jesse Faden, an ordinary girl who lived in a town called... ordinary? Whatever, it's fine. When Jesse was younger, her and her brother Dylan found a slide projector that just so happened to be an interdimensional portal generator. So they do what your average Joe does, and decided to show it to all their friends. However, as you could have probably predicted, this wasn't a good idea. All the adults in Ordinary just vanished, and Dylan got kidnapped by the Federal Bureau of Control, or FBC for short, which works largely like the SCP Foundation, in the sense that it contains dangerous paranormal items and entities, and hides them from the public. The only upside to all of this is that Jessie ended up bonding with an entity called Polaris, which gave her vague superpowers. Seriously, unless you're actively looking for it, it is almost impossible, if not impossible, to determine what Polaris' powers are. I even checked the wiki, and even they are a bit vague. However, from what I gathered, it seems like the Hiss and Polaris are sort of opposites, and Polaris can purify the Hiss of certain objects and people. However, I don't really like this, so we'll improve upon this later. Speaking of which, the Hiss, the main antagonist of the game, is not less vague. And the only thing we know about it is that it causes hallucinations and transforms/takes control of people that it infects. One day when Jesse is like, 28? What took you so long to get to the FBC? Your brother's been missing for 17 years, and you decide to only now look for him? Whatever, it doesn't bother me, it bothers me, it bothers me a lot, whatever, we'll get to it when we get to it. Okay, fine. When she arrives at the FBC, after some hijinks, she finds the director down on the floor with a gun next to him, that when she picks up, makes her the director instantly. Which is one of the main plot points of the game. Okay, add that to the board of things to change. Don't get me wrong, it is a really neat plot point. The problem is that the execution falls flat, like everything else in the game. That's why we have to change it. Okay, look. What you need to know next is very simple. There are a lot of hijinks, but none of them really contribute to the story. The main thing you need to know is that she finds Dylan, who happens to be corrupted by the Hiss. And then she instantly heals him, and the game ends. Okay, I'm only half joking. The thing is, it sure feels like that's what happens. The game feels very short, especially for what it sets up. And this is one of the main problems with this game. It sets up a lot of things, but never gives the payoff. So the player just feels empty inside. So we'll try to change that. Okay, this is basically all you need to know for now. So let's get right into... Jesse in the main game is a bit bland. When I say this, I mean that she only has 3 states. Worrying about Dylan, worrying about Polaris, and toast. Well, not even that. More like plain bread, which is bland as fuck. And since she's the protagonist, I felt like we should change her first. And the first thing to change is her age. Why, you may ask? Simple. It is a bit stupid that she only tries to find Dylan at 28 years old. I know it is a bit silly, but it is one of my pet peeves and it really bothers me, so we'll change that. So, in our version, Jessie will be an 18-year-old. Just barely of age. Why not earlier, you ask? Simple, we are going to say that she is only now starting to develop her powers, due to her brain only now becoming able to handle Polaris. This will fix that tiny detail, and will be useful once we get to the power section. We also need to fix her origin, which is basically non-existent. So now, what we will do is the following. Jesse Faden was an 11-year-old when her brother got taken by the FBC, and she was put in an orphanage due to her not possessing the same supernatural properties as her brother. Or so it seems. Her childhood was very rough. Although she wasn't bullied often, she had an extremely hard time making friends due to her trauma. She felt like if she got close to anyone, the FBC would take them away like they did to Dylan. This trauma would only continue to develop further and further as the orphanage would see strange events occurring left and right, which we later come to find was because Ordinary was extremely close, dangerously close. At age 14, Faden starts becoming obsessed with the paranormal, reading books and articles about it non-stop. And at age 15, she manages to catch her first paranormal entity, a golden pin that instantly combusts paper upon contact. She tries to show it to the orphanage personnel, but no one believes her. They think she's just pulling a prank on them. However, her reluctance to admit it, quote-unquote, ended up landing her various punishments and therapy sessions. And even though most of them did agree with what happened and think she was telling the truth, they seem to have forgotten everything by the next day. At age 16, Faden decided to attempt suicide. She just didn't see an end to her suffering. Right before she stabbed herself in the heart, the knife went backwards. Her powers were starting to manifest. This gave her hope that maybe, now, everyone would believe her. Sadly, right before she can reach the head of the orphanage, she sees that the FBC are already there. This leads to a stealth section where she must escape the orphanage. She goes on the run for 2 years as she uses her powers to go by. On her 18th birthday, she hears a voice, the voice of Polaris, for the first time, which leads her to the oldest house, the headquarters of the FBC. She enters and she finds a friendly face, a janitor named Ati. He seems a bit senile, but provides precious help. He tells Jesse that he thinks she's his new assistant. So, he gives her a keycard and tells her to go talk to the director. However, when she arrives, she finds that he has been corrupted by the hiss. Jesse then has a panic attack, causing her to become static. However, for the first time in her life, she's not alone. Polaris is there to help. So she collects herself and defeats the director using her telekinetic powers. She's enters unconscious. When she wakes up, Emily, a humanoid being with long ears and pure-like eyes, is there to greet her. Or rather, interrogate her. Emily tells Jesse that she saw everything, and that the only explanation is that she's a prime candidate to the position of director of the FBC. Jesse then gets very upset and tells Emily that she's not there to perpetuate the Bureau's actions. Emily tells her that she has no choice, as a link to Hadron, Polaris, is the only thing that can stop the hiss. Jesse then starts crying, and Emily grabs her by the arm and yells at her, which worsens things, so she gives her a napkin and tells her that she will help. Emily then shows her a machine and explains that it can put her consciousness in a replica body, which will allow her to not worry about dying when traversing the Bureau, and that if she finds a machine similar to this one, she'll be able to modify her brain and gain new abilities. Then, the game properly starts. Phew, that was a bit heavy. Let's take a break from the lore and talk about the gameplay, shall we? So, as you could probably already tell, this game will be a roguelite. The reason for this is pretty simple, and it is the reason why I decided to make this video in the first place. You see, the main game of Control is just a generic third-person shooter, which is a huge shame, as it doesn't feel like it goes well with the lore. We are constantly hearing about these incredibly interesting objects and places, and we never get to see or use them. Instead, we only technically get to use one, and the rest are just telekinesis upgrades. We'll change that. In our version, the gameplay will revolve around us finding different objects that we can use to defeat the hiss. Before listing the objects, also known as OOP or Objects of Power, it is important to establish that when we find them, there is a small chance that Jessie already knows what the item does. This is due to the fact that when she was younger, she was obsessed with paranormal activity, as stated before. This chance will decrease as the game progresses. However, the OOP combos and some of the descriptions can only be found by reading the files scattered throughout the game. The Objects of Power can be classified as active, which can be in one of 3 slots and work as weapons. They work like guns, swords, grenades, etc. Passive, which can be in one of 3 slots as well, and work as protections, turrets, and buffs. And items, of which there will only be one slot, and work is extremely powerful when used objects. Aside from the OOP, the player can also augment Jesse's brain to give her more telekinetic powers, these upgrades being lost every time the player respawns, with the only ones remaining being the object throw and force push. All the other abilities included are the same as in the actual game, the only difference being their upgrades. For example, the object throw can be upgraded so that the player can levitate multiple objects, and the flying ability can be altered so it creates an AoE whenever Jesse gets off the ground. To purchase upgrades, the player must do a bit of resource management, as the components we find during battle can be used in different ways to unlock different abilities. As for the bureau, which will remain mostly the same as despite everything, the level design is one of the best things about the actual game, the main difference will be that every time we finish a room, we get an OOP. We'll also have to divide it in different sections in order to make our life a bit easier when it comes to stating what story beats go where. Since the first level in the main game is such a great tutorial, I decided not to change it, only adding what we needed to make our vision come true. The second section will consist of the maintenance sector, in which Jesse must fix some of its components by killing 2 bosses, which will be elaborated upon later. The third section will actually be the one we will change the most, as it will take place in the astral plane. Yeah, in our version there won't be a black rock quarry, as I had to pick between that section and the astral plane, and I felt like the astral plane was more relevant to the lore. The main point of the level will be to traverse the plane in order to get to the inverted pyramid that will be guarded by the former from the main game, just with a few alterations. I should also mention that in our version, the astral maze and the astral plane are the same, so we will combine both sections. Section 4 will be the Panopticon, which will just consist of a boss rush until we get to Dylan. The last phase is a huge spoiler, so I won't tell you how it works until we get to the story section. To make it easier to picture what I'm talking about, I will give you some examples of objects of power that we can use during our version, although keep in mind that these are just examples, and as with every video game, they could change in case the game was actually made. The Bone Juice. Active. A self-filling glass of milk that when drunk allows the person who did it to turn their bones into projectiles, immediately growing the bones back once launched. Pairings. Ash Pepper, Ice Cone, and Buzz Fizz. The Ash Pepper. Active. Ashes that when sniffed give the user the ability to shoot embers that are as hot as the surface of the sun. Pairings. Ice Cone, Bone Juice. The Ice Cone. Active. An endless supply of ice cream cones made out of clear ice that when thrown causes an AoE effect that slows down enemies. Continuous exposure may cause them to freeze, killing them instantly. Pairings. Ash Pepper, Bone Juice. Stroke Flavored Gum. Item. Takes out a portion of health to every enemy in the AoE and causes minor enemies to instantly die and medium enemies to get stunned. Pairings. None. The D20. Item. Summons a random entity depending on the number of the die. The higher the number, the stronger the entity. Pairings. None. The Reverse Flashbang. Item. A flashbang-like grenade that generates a black hole that sucks enemies in and then violently blows up. Pairings? None. The Buzz Fizz. Passive. When drunk, creates a shield around the player that reduces damage and electrocutes enemies around Jesse. Pairings? Bone Juice, Penny Projectile Propeller. The Penny Projectile Propeller. Passive. A piggy bank that shoots pennies at Mach 5. Pairings? Buzz Fizz. The Wing Cap. Passive. Allows the player to fly if they can't do it with the telekinetic powers, and uncaps, get it, the flight height if they do. Pairings? None. Now, you may have noticed that I have mentioned pairings. These just serve the purpose of giving the player more to work with less objects. Some pairings can be, for example, Buzz Fizz and Penny Projectile Propeller. Makes the pennies have an electric effect and magnetic, making them chase the enemies. The Ice Cone and the Ash Pepper. If they enter in contact, it creates a smoke cloud that reduces accuracy of the enemies behind it. However, you can still see them, but you lose the damage of the components. To conclude the gameplay section, let's talk about the enemies and bosses. The main problem with the base game is that when it comes to these, the game drops the ball so hard it makes a hole to the other side of the planet. All the enemies are just generic shooter enemies. You have the rifleman, you have the rocket launcher guy, TF2 Heavy, and that's about it. The only exception is being new, but stronger! So, let's change that, shall we? Pinocchio, light enemy. A wooden enemy that if looked at for too long will cause control inversion on the player. It will also change positions from time to time. Dumbo, light enemy. A plushie that flies towards the player, detonating upon getting too close. Works similar to the hits charged in the main game. The white rabbit, medium enemy, a rabbit-like hideous being that makes you look at it. You must kill it to stop the effect. Luckily, it has low health, so it is not very hard to kill. Jiminy Cricket, medium enemy, a humanoid cricket that spits acid towards the player and is extremely fast, being able to dodge slow projectile attacks. Cinderella, heavy enemy, a carousel that shoots crystal towards the player. The Great Mighty Pooh. Yes, this is a Conker's Bad Fur Day reference. Boss. It is that thing we find in the base game inside the pumps. It is immune to regular attacks, except if we eat his eyes, which appear in batches. It attacks using screams and by throwing an acid, poop-like substance at the player. The Source. Boss. A reference to the actual lore of the game. One of the previous directors of the FBC that has pyrokinetic powers. Shoot him until he dies. Freezing and water OOPs deal extra damage. Alright, that is everything I wanted to talk about the gameplay. Now, to complete the video, let's talk about... After talking to Emily, Jesse starts exploring the oldest house. At one point, she finds a TV playing a show called The Threshold Kids. The show hypnotizes her, transporting the player to a flashback section where we go through Jesse's past. This will be found all throughout the game. When Jesse comes to consciousness, she continues to explore the bureau, reaching a room where she finds a four-legged spider-like being with a human face. She defeats it and comes back to Emily, who tells her that all of this was just a test in a safe space, and that from now on, things would be much harder. Jesse then leaves the room and starts thinking about Dylan, finding in the idea of finding him the determination to continue. After this, she finds a sentient computer called Erish. They turn out to be friendly, or at least friendlier than Emily. But they tell Jesse that she needs to clear the coolant pumps and fix the energy converters, or else he would be corrupted by the hiss, and if that happens, it would have access to the entire digital system of the Bureau, and by consequence, the world. Jesse agrees to help and proceeds to do just that. However, when she finishes the first section, she finds Ati, who tells her, "You have been a good assistant. However, you get too lost in your work and refuse to look around you. Take a look at the board. It has some tasks that will help you focus." Now the player can complete the side quests that not only give them neat things, but also some files that hint towards the true nature of the FBC. Jesse proceeds, finding a new member of the FBC, a living gun named Marshall. She's very rough towards Jesse, telling her that she's too weak to complete the task. Jesse gets angry and snaps at Marshall, who tells her that she appreciates the fight she has in her. Then Marshall transports Jesse to Dressel Play, a hotel-like place that can shift around and create new areas, like a maze, and tells her to find the board of directors and destroy them, for they have been corrupted by the hiss. Then Ati appears, and tells Jesse that she still hesitates a lot, so he gives her more tasks, that the player, again, has a choice of doing. The catch is, if they do, Jesse will say that Polaris doesn't feel the same anymore, and all the telekinetic powers will suffer a nerf. After killing the board, she's transported to the Panopticon, where she's alone, where she's afraid, where she proceeds. It is important to mention that this is the only checkpoint in the game, as if she dies, she won't be transported back to the beginning of the game. Instead, she'll be transported to the beginning of the Panopticon with all the OOPs she had and all her telekinetic powers. She then finds the previous directors of the FBC, having to defeat them one by one until she reaches the end of the Panopticon. Dylan is not there. Dylan is nowhere. Turns out he died a long time ago, releasing the hiss upon death to prevent the FBC from continuing to do what it does best, control the public in order to, according to Marshall, prevent humanity from evolving past their own good. "You see," says Marshall, "humanity was not created by a god, which means that it has true free will, which can be extremely dangerous under the right circumstances. We can't let that happen, or humanity and the rest of the world might cease to exist. I mean, even though we have interfered so many times, we couldn't do anything too substantial. Just look at World War II. We tried to prevent it, but all we could do is make the Allies win, and even then, it was mostly luck. We lost a lot of not only humans, but also quote-unquote paranormal beings that day." Then, they explain that Polaris is a parasite they planted in Jesse's brain in order to make her their own pawn. This way, they could develop it further and spread it to the rest of the humanity, causing mass mind control. This way the Bureau doesn't have to try to indirectly influence humanity from creating conflict. They can just do it directly. The reason they made Jesse complete all those tasks was to make Emily, Irish, and Marshall have absolute control over the FBC, as they are the only ones who haven't been corrupted by the hiss. However, they did not take into consideration one thing: Ati, who turns out to be the remnants, or at least the benign ones, of Dylan, and they were helping Jesse all along. And now, we reach the end, where a few things can happen. If Jesse chose to do all the tasks, she has a choice to choose between Dylan and release the paranormal to humanity, or the FBC, and become their puppet forever, controlling humanity. If she doesn't finish all the tasks, then she has no choice but to side with the FBC. If she chose Dylan, then she has to fight the remnants of the FBC. If she dies, then everything remains the same, with no changes. If she chose the FBC, then she has to fight Dylan and all her previous deaths at once. If she dies, everything remains the same. If Dylan wins, then everything is left open. We don't know what will happen. It is a mystery. However, if the FBC wins, Jesse will be shown as president, with control over multiple people. And this is the end of the game. Thank you for listening to me. Hi everyone, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. This was actually my first real video, quote unquote, like the one I put the most effort into. And I plan to do a lot of things with this channel in the future. Like I plan to analyze the comment from Half-Life because I think they are a bit stupid. I will probably rewrite a few games like I did to this one. And yeah, that's really about it. Do all the YouTuber things and subscribe and stuff. I don't know. Have a nice day, everyone.